The Ukrainian president visited Washington to appeal for help to fight Russia, winning warm words of support and weapons from Joe Biden. But he confronted skeptical Republicans who want to cut off aid to Ukraine now. The conflict seems destined to enter an even more complicated phase in the months ahead. And what will happen if the Republicans come to power in 2024? To discuss U.S. role in the ongoing conflict and U.S. foreign relations, especially with India as well, we're being joined by Raymond Vickery right here from our WION studios. Raymond is a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development and has studied U.S.-India ties specifically for over 30 years. Welcome to WION, sir. So let's start off right from here. Will the war end in 2024 if Republicans come to power post the upcoming U.S. presidential elections? Is there a difference of opinion between Democrats and Republicans for aiding Ukraine?
Yes, I think it's a very serious question. Obviously, under the Biden administration, just as the administration has been all in for relations with India, it's all in supporting democracy in Ukraine against the invasion by Russia. I think that what you're seeing now is not really so much a reflection of a Biden-Trump split, although there are very grave differences. In part because former President Trump has had such strong ties with the Russians. But what you're seeing is a playing out of difficulties within the Republican Party itself, particularly in the House of Representatives, where you have a band of very far right-wing members who are determined to have their way on the overall budget question. And of course, when you're talking about an additional $26 billion for Ukraine, that plays into that budget scenario. And they are not going to let that be resolved unless they get some concession, they think, in terms of what their own position is. So it's real concern. I would hope and pray that if the former president comes back in, he's not going to do what he said, and that is end it within 24 hours, because the only way he can end it in 24 hours is by withdrawing all support and allowing a bloodbath to occur in Ukraine and have the complete extinguishment of democracy.
Right. So how do you see America's support structure for Ukraine's war going forward? Till when can US go on aiding and funding Ukraine in this battle? Because Russia is not backing down and has found more allies as well.
The United States, as you know, has a very, very large economy, and the budget of the United States is very large. So although $26 billion is a lot of money, as Eric Dirksen once said, he was a former senator, a billion here, a billion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. The fact is that that's not all that crucial in terms of the U.S. budget. So the U.S. can continue to support virtually indefinitely. The real question is not whether there is the wherewithal to do it, but is there the political will to do it? And the kinds of difficulties you're seeing that have created a different kind of reception for President Zelensky as opposed to the last time he was in Washington are a reflection of a political will contest as opposed to the wherewithal to be able to support Ukraine. We haven't really begun to do the kind of mobilization that the United States is capable of and showed in World War II, for example, if it has the political will to do it. But one hopes that it will not come to that. We hope that there will be a continued support for democracy, following the values which the United States, India, and the other great democracies of the world have, so that the naked aggression, the naked absolute refutation of the UN Charter will not occur. And so I think that that's the real question.
So you mentioned India, and I now need to come to your area of expertise here, that is US-India ties. You've spent decades studying these ties. How do you see ties between these two nations moving forward in the backdrop of such polarizing issues which have divided the world? Several nations do not see eye to eye, but India has successfully still established diplomatic ties across the world. But what goes forward between US and India next?
Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for it. You know, I first came to India when I was a Fulbright scholar in 1964. I lived on Ring Road at Friends Colony when it was way out in the countryside. Of course, it's in the middle of the city now. So I have seen the changes over 59 years, and I can tell you it's night and day. You had a non-aligned, really a pact with the old Soviet Union. The Indian situation was a top-down economy. There was not the kind of interplay and real democracy that you have now. And when I got into government in President Clinton's administration, the United States and India were still estranged democracies. But what happened is that, one, India opened up in terms of its opening to the world, and at the same time, the United States began to appreciate that it was not one way or another, that each country had to follow its own values. And it has been the following of democratic values between these two greatest democracies in the world, in my view, which has brought us closer and closer together since the beginning of the 90s. Economic factors have played into that. The rise of China claiming an entire state, Arunachal Pradesh, of India, and at the same time saying that it was going to expand in the South China Seas. We have a common set of interests and a common set of values. So the kind of cooperation that we see across the board, not only in terms of military matters, just take, for example, the idea in the 1960s that India would allow some repairs of ships, defense ships, in its ports was a non-starter. Well, that sort of thing happens routinely now. You've got Operation Malabar, in which the United States and India work together in terms of figuring out how to promote freedom of the seas. All those things have taken place. And the technology changes, the ability to communicate. When I was a student out here, I wanted to call home on Christmas Day, so I had to book a call a month beforehand to go into a post office to be able to make the call to my family. Well, I still couldn't get through in those days. Now you're riding down the road and you can talk all over the world. So, you know, WION has it right, and that is the world is one. And that has enabled us to have a closer interaction between the United States and India. And then it's the common values that we see. Freedom of the press, freedom of expression, the ability to have a rule of law, which are the foundation. And then you build on top of that the security interest, the economic interest, and those are all going in the right direction at this point. And one can see that in terms of what happened with the G20. And when Biden went very first to see Prime Minister Modi, and then other things took place.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us right here in the WION studio, sir. That was Raymond Vickery joining us in New Delhi to talk more about how Russia and Ukraine will move forward with US support and US-India ties, which is definitely his subject of expertise.